my channel. Welcome back to another video. I'm Jessie E and you're watching. Before I say another word, I have to give a huge shout out to one of my subscribers, Alexia. Thank you so much for sending me this incredible scientist bow tie. I'm never taking it off.
Well, it's upside down, so could you at least take it off to put it back on correctly?
I want to wear this bow tie into the freaking ground. Alexia also so kindly sent me this adorable dinosaur T-Rex bow tie. Look at its little arms. I freaking love. And also volume 1 of Vision. If you watched my Black Girl Magic vlog, my latest one, you'll know that Vision volume 1 and 2 were stolen from me, and nothing made me happier than to receive this package and to have Vision home with me again, because this is my favorite comic. Vision is probably my favorite superhero. I'm absolutely obsessed with him, and it just means the world to me that I have this back in my collection, so thank you so much, Alexia. Now, this is the annual video we all make on BookTube where we talk about our top 10 books of the previous year. Except y'all know I can never follow the rules, and I'm giving you my top 15 books of 2019. Now with this list, I'm not trying to be intentionally different. I just literally was agonizing over the list trying to pick only 10 books because each of the books that I have on this list impacted me in their own unique ways. They are so different from one another in terms of the type of story, the storytelling, the genre that these books come from, and the messages that they all carry. It's not as if this list is just 15 YA fantasy books or half contemporary books with some magical realism sprinkled in. I genuinely mean that each of these books is so different from one another, and I think if you stay into the end of the video, you will definitely understand why I had to include all of them. Book number 15 on this list is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Like everybody and they mama on BookTube last year, I absolutely adored The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I was so excited that I finally gave into the hype and picked it up because I loved that book to pieces. It was my first Taylor Jenkins Reid novel, and this is my second. I was really excited for this novel to come out. I believe its release was last March. I read it the week that it was released, and it didn't disappoint me in the slightest. It tells the story of a band titled Daisy Jones and the Six, who through a whirlwind of events rise to fame in the 1970s and ultimately break up under nefarious and mysterious circumstances. Now, each of the characters in this band are all very distinct and unique, and the book is about a biographer sitting each of them down after none of them having spoken for the last 30 years and getting each of their sides of the story. One of my favorite tropes in books is the same story from multiple perspectives, especially when each perspective adds something different or causes the reader to kind of doubt the perspective of someone else. It sheds new light on a perspective. I love the ability to look at one situation, one scenario from multiple angles, especially because one character's perception, one person's perception will vary from another's. And the book handled that perfectly. I loved that you would have one event and each of them would have 5 different sides of the story, because that's exactly what life is. It's something that we do not even maliciously, but we just can't help but bring our own bias, our own lens into anything that we take in. And I absolutely loved the portrayal of that. This book is incredibly polarizing because a lot of people didn't vibe with the storytelling. It's definitely told in an interview format, and a lot of people felt that the characters weren't delved into enough and were generic. And I can definitely see why that was the case for some people. It was the absolute opposite for me, because I felt the things that each character said provided very real insight into the character's psyche, thought processes, and persona. This book is a perfect example of how the things that come out of our mouths are incredibly revealing as to who we are as people. And definitely the characters that I related to the most and enjoyed hearing the perspective of the most were Billy and Camille, although I freaking love Karen, and I think I have a lot of Karen in me. I'm sorry, her name is Camila, not Camille.
What is wrong with me?
And definitely the characters that I enjoyed the most, related to the most, were Billy, Camila, and Karen. Those 2 characters were my whole heart and soul, and Billy has got a lot of freaking problems, but I definitely see the layers to his character, and some of the struggles that Billy has are ones that I definitely relate to. Now, if you are tired of seeing nothing but glowing reviews for Daisy Jones and the Six, definitely check out Cam from Wolf Shop Publishing's rant review of this book, because he brings up some very valid criticisms and also absolutely loathed this book. So if you're looking for some harsh criticism of it, definitely check that video out. Some of his criticisms were actually strong points for the book for me, but that is, again, it's a perfect freaking example of how all of our perceptions lead lead to us viewing things in our own way. The biggest reason that I love this book though was the themes. It tackles relationships, addiction, and addictive behaviors in a way that really touched my soul. So much about this book resonated with me personally. I wrote down a lot of the lines from it and really sat with them. And I found that this was one of the books that after I finished it, I could not stop thinking about it even for months afterward. I have memorized so many of the quotes from this book, and I did so on the spot because they meant so much to me. Like, there's a quote that Daisy says where she says, "I learned about sex and love the hard way, that some men will take what they want and feel no debt, that some men only want one piece of you." Number 14 on this list caught me by surprise, and it was Bend in the Stars by Rachel Barenbaum. I read this book because I saw some people talking about it on Bookstagram, not a whole lot, but some, and it got me intrigued. It is a historical fiction novel about two siblings who are both absolutely brilliant. They're living during World War I in Russia. One of them, Miri, is an absolutely talented surgeon, and her brother, Vanya, is a wildly intelligent physicist. And they're living in anti-Semitic Russia with their Baba, who is a fucking badass. She's a literal assassin. She serves as a matchmaker for the community, so people will come over and into their house to seek blessings for matches or ask her opinion on their relationships. So their family is really the hallmark of their community, and unfortunately their community is torn apart by anti-Semitism and they have to go on the run. And so the book is about this journey, them trying to flee from Russia, where Miri and Vanya end up getting separated. Vanya ends up going on a journey with Miri's fiance, and Miri gets stuck with this soldier who has deserted, who is secretly Jewish. So you get both of their perspectives as the four of these people are trying to survive. Now, there is a heavy scientific component in this book that I absolutely loved. The book does not stray away from the physics aspect of it. It explains the science and the theory in depth. Vanya finds out that if he can successfully disprove Einstein's theory of relativity, then he will be given safe passage into America with his family. Now, this is incredibly important because this pressure was laid on a lot of Jewish people during this period. In order to survive, Jewish people had to be useful. That means that they had to be doctors or scientists or to provide some sort of useful benefit to society in order to justify their right to live. This rhetoric hit me very heavily because this is rhetoric that still surrounds immigrants to America in this day. We definitely only want immigrants in this country who are talented in some way. More importantly, immigrants that are extraordinary in some way. And so it's sad to see how this idea of immigrant usefulness has still managed to survive and is pervasive in America to this day. And y'all know that I love elder main characters. The Baba character, she was so freaking She was fucking awesome. Okay, she was so cool. She was my favorite character in the book. The writing was incredible. The pacing was excellent. I loved the story. I loved the celebration of Jewish culture and heritage and how it balanced, the struggle to survive with having a lot of philosophy in it, as well as a touch of romance. There was just enough romance in this book to not make me roll my eyes. And on top of that, the romance in this book is one of my favorite romances of all time, topped only by the Song of Achilles. And that is incredibly high praise coming from me because I'm not a big fan of romance. This book features my favorite and the only love triangle that I've ever successfully enjoyed. It's the only love triangle I've seen successfully executed, and it also has the only male character that I would be willing to date and marry, Yuri. Yuri could get it.
Yuri could get it.
I was reading this book and I was like, yep, turned on by a fictional boy. That's the level of single that we're at, people. He was great. Like, I went on Twitter and I started freaking out over the scene with the eye. And if you've read this book, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And it involves Yuri and somebody's eyeball, and that's all I'm gonna say. So cool. Book number 13 on this list is The Beast's Heart by Leah Shallcross. I definitely butchered that name. I'm sorry. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and it was one of my most highly anticipated releases of last year. I read it early last year, the second that it came out, and it is told from the perspective of the Beast, which I found very, very interesting, especially because the Beauty and the Beast story historically is a little problematic when you look at it logically. It's a little Stockholm syndrome-y, And I know what y'all are thinking.
Oh my god, another Beauty and the Beast retelling. How original.
It was so immersive and gorgeously written. The writing was so beautiful that I read this book slowly. I ate up every page. I drank up every word. It was so atmospheric, and I absolutely loved the liberties that Leah took with the story. Instead of following the original story and making the house full of servants that had been turned into objects, the house itself was a character. So the house didn't speak, but it would do things to let the Beast know how it felt about how the Beast was behaving. So if the Beast was being really grumpy, it would turn his clothes into dust or something like that. And I just loved the characterization of the house. I just thought it was really, really well done. This is definitely a character-driven story. It delves so deep into Belle and Beast's character. I thought it was so impressive that the story took place in one freaking house and yet was so entertaining. It takes real skill as an author to do what this book does. The Beast was probably my favorite character. I loved seeing representation for a male character try and unlearn toxic masculine attitudes. He's trying really, really hard not to become his father, who was an abuser. The book is basically about him trying to love better than he himself has ever been loved. That is the kind of love story that we all need. If you are looking for a quiet, absolutely mesmerizing character study, this book is 100% the book for you. Number 14 on this list is Dominicana by Angie Cruz. This was kindly sent to me by Flatiron Books, and I read it for Afro Latinx-a-thon. And this book meant the entire freaking world to me. I was in no way prepared to love this story as thoroughly as I did. This is the story of a young girl named Ana Cancion who happily lives in the Dominican Republic with her family, but is forced to marry a man that is twice her age, and he promptly takes her to New York City. This is a historical fiction novel that is set in the 1960s. I personally love historical fiction, and the setting and establishment of the 1960s, the political climate, all of it was incredibly well done. And the story is basically about Ana growing up in New York City without her family, being incredibly scared, living in this oppressive house with this man that is taking advantage of her, and having to come of age in that environment. This ultimately is a story about self-love and immigration and family, about the force and power our own culture has over each of us, but also doesn't fail to explore the desires and the hopes and the wishes of the individual. Ana is one of my favorite characters of all time as a result of this book. You feel by the end of the story that you know her in and out, and this is one of the best books I've ever read in terms of character development. Ana is not the same girl at the end of the book that she was at the start. Now, some people criticize this book for having anti-Black language, but I personally do not feel that this book illustrates anti-Blackness. I think that the book illustrates anti-Blackness in Latinx communities. It absolutely does a fantastic job of depicting that anti-Blackness as wrong. Ana's husband, Juan, definitely is a prime example of anti-Blackness in the Latinx community, as Juan cannot stand and detests Black people despite the fact that his brother Cesar is clocked as Black by society, and definitely both of these boys have Black heritage. Cesar has dark skin and kinky hair, and a big theme in this book is how a lot of Afro-Latinx people like to pretend that they don't have Black ancestry because Blackness is seen as undesirable within Latinx communities. This, of course, is something that I have experienced within my own family, being somebody who is Afro-Mexican. I've personally seen the divide. I definitely have family members on my Mexican side who very obviously have Black heritage that they like to pretend doesn't exist. And I just love that this book is a love letter to Latinx individuals. There were so many lines in this book that reminded me of my own upbringing, especially the depiction of elder Latinas, how they speak in riddles but make perfect sense. There is just a hint of magical realism in this book, and it really emphasizes the power of Latinas, of madres, and how truly matriarchal Latinx culture is at its core. The writing was gorgeous, the story was incredible, and I could go on and on about this book. But I'm not going to because I know you want me to move on. Book 11 on this list is She Came to Slay by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. I found out about She Came to Slay as a result of attending the Well-Read Black Girl Festival, where Erica Armstrong Dunbar was one of the speakers. Now, in case you don't know, She Came to Slay is the biography, the life and times of Lady Moses Harriet Tubman. This is actually the first time that Harriet Tubman's story has been told from the lens of a Black woman. And one of my favorite things from Dr. Dunbar's discussion was how she talked about how harmful Black history consistently being told from the white lens has been to the Black community, how harmful it's been and detrimental to the telling of our stories. This book is a perfect example of why Own Voices stories are so
fucking important.
Harriet's story was told with such empathy, with such detail, with such insight and passion from Erica's perspective. Passion and detail and empathy that I have never before seen given to Harriet Tubman. Everything I've ever read about Harriet Tubman was so removed and distant and dispassionate. But not this book. This book is very easy to read. It's something that teens or even younger could read, and it also has just freaking gorgeous illustrations. Like, look at that. The illustrations were so beautiful, and the writing was phenomenal. There were so many things that I wrote down from the book, so much that I learned about Harriet, and I know you're probably thinking Harriet Tubman's story couldn't possibly be all that entertaining. There's a reason that this book made my top 10 list. It's phenomenal. It's objectively fantastic. This book was so good that it felt fictional. Some of my favorite things that I learned from this book was that Harriet Tubman was only 4'11". I had no idea she was that small. And she was so strong and stubborn that it once took 3 grown men to remove her from a train car that they felt she didn't belong in. In the process, she got her arm and her ribs broken before she was successfully removed from the train. Harriet Tubman just was a bad bitch. She used to carry a gun pretty much at all times, and on her dozens of trips to free slaves, she never once lost a slave to illness, capture, or anything. All of the slaves that went with her were successfully freed and liberated. You have to read this book. Now we are into our top 10 books of 2019, and number 10 is none other than The Way of All Flesh by Ambrose Parry. I'm just realizing how many of the books on this list are unhyped, and I'm very proud of that. This is a criminally underhyped historical thriller that is set in 1847 Edinburgh. We are following a protagonist named Will Raven, who is pretty much a scoundrel that is studying to be a doctor. Will has definitely done some unsavory things in his life. He comes from a poor background. He's willing to do what it takes to survive, but he wants to elevate his position in society, and so he becomes apprentice to Dr. Simpson, who was a real person. Dr. Simpson was a doctor who is accredited for the discovery of chloroform. Now, he gets indoctrinated into Dr. Simpson's odd life and moves into Dr. Simpson's house, which is full of medical oddities, basically strange things floating in jars. By strange things, I mean body parts. In this house, Will meets Sarah, who is Dr. Simpson's housemaid. She also helps out in the medical clinic. Sarah is wildly intelligent. She's wicked smart, actually, and really resents her position in society. She resents the fact that she can't go to school. She resents the fact that she has to work as a maid, that she has to bite her tongue because of men's fragility. And on top of all of this, there are some very gruesome and disturbing murders happening in the city of Edinburgh. Women are turning up with their bodies mangled in all sorts of manners, and the police, who are at a loss for what to do, ask Dr. Simpson and Will to help solve the case. So these 3 characters, Will, Simpson, and Sarah, are going down this journey to find the killer, and the journey just gets more dangerous and more gruesome with every step. This book features my favorite writing style of all time, which is where the narrator is very witty and sarcastic, not excessively so, and provides descriptions of others with one sentence that help perfectly explain who that person is. I will give you an example. The short time she had known him had been enough to identify Raven as typical of his kind, self-regarding and prone to pomposity, believing his education elevated him above those who had been more limited in their opportunities. And some of the characters say incredibly profound things that I truly enjoyed, such as, "I believe that with a passionate desire and an unwearied will, we can achieve impossibilities." Unfortunately, the plot twist to this book got spoiled for me. I wish I could have read this book without knowing the twist. The twist was so amazing. I did not see it coming. I think it's the kind of twist that you just can't predict, or can only predict if you have a really, really, really wild imagination. If you were able to predict the twist in this book, please let me know. It's a duology. The second book is already out. The cover is even more gorgeous than this one. I can't wait to read it. Now, number 9 on this list is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I will forever thank Brandy of Brandy's Books for sending this book to me. I think I've thanked her like 5 times for it. I just never would have read this book without her pushing. This book is all about the rumored love between Achilles and his general Patroclus. It starts with them as boys well before they become established as men, and it follows them into their manhood. So you grow up with these boys, you see their relationship develop, the characters around them, all of that fun stuff. I thought that the world building was great, the writing was lush. The relationship between Achilles and Patroclus, I've already said, is my favorite of all time. Every single page about this book captivated me, and I completely believed in the story. I loved the characters, even the ones who were supposed to be antagonists. What's her name? Thestis?
Whatever.
Achilles' mother was my favorite character, even though she was such a jerk. But Madeline Miller does such a great job of making her an understandable villain. And I think the reason I loved this book so much, a big part of the reason I loved this book so much, is because Miller does an excellent job of humanizing Achilles, of bringing him down to earth, this larger-than-life demigod who is worshipped and revered, and you get to see him through the eyes of Patroclus, who doesn't put him on a pedestal. He does to some extent, simply because he loves him so much, but not to the level of being a fan, if that makes sense. I also really love how the subject of Achilles' conquests were handled in this book. He's depicted throughout mythology as this very ladies' man guy who's obsessed with his next conquest, and I love the spin that Madeline Miller put on that. But I also love that Madeline Miller didn't write Achilles without real flaws. He's truly morally ambiguous. By that, I mean his ambiguity isn't something that you can necessarily explain away easily. Some of the decisions that he makes are ones that are just truly immoral no matter how you spin them. And I really appreciated that in the story because it makes it more difficult to root for him. And I'm going to read to you the part of this book that sold me. Like when I read this sentence, that was when I knew that this book was going to be a 5-star. That was when I knew that this book would end up on this list. That was when I knew that this book would be one of my all-time favorites. Had she really thought I would not know him, I could recognize him by touch alone, by smell. I would know him blind, by the way his breaths came and his feet struck the earth. I would know him in death at the end of the world. Part of why I love Patroclus's character and subsequently this book is because Patroclus loves in the same way that I do, in a way that is almost vicious. Number 8 on this list is Let's Go Swimming on Doomsday by Natalie C. Anderson. I read this book in February for Blackathon. At the time, I went on Twitter, I went on my channel, I went everywhere that I could, I went on my Instagram, and I was like, yo, y'all need to read this book.
Y'all didn't listen.
Because I haven't seen anybody else review this book, and that is a damn shame. Like, I genuinely mean it. Y'all were out here hyping some whack-ass books this year when you could have just been reading this one. I pray y'all get well soon. Let's Go Swimming on Doomsday is a young adult contemporary about Abdi, and it starts with Abdi and his family being kidnapped and thrown into a cell. 3 years ago, Abdi's older brother, what was his name? Dahir, was kidnapped by terrorist group Al-Shabaab, and Abdi learns that Dahir isn't dead as he had once believed, but he has now been successfully brainwashed and is now a leader in the organization. The CIA agent who has kidnapped Abdi and his family tells Abdi that if he is able to successfully remove his brother from the organization and spy on Al-Shabaab, aka become one of them, then he will give Abdi and his family safe passage into America. This book is about the things that Abdi has to do in order to survive. It is one of the most immersive, exciting stories that I've ever read in my life. My heart was pounding. I felt like it was real. I was so concerned and worried for Abdi about the decisions that he would make, about how they would affect him. There's incredible representation for anxiety and PTSD and so much social commentary in this book. But the writing is what really hit home for me. The writing just really brings it all in and has officially made Natalie C. Anderson an auto-buy author for me. This book delves into morality in a way that is very insightful, and it's not one-sided. I didn't feel like an agenda was being pushed on me, and also the mystery component of this book was very intriguing. I personally have no criticisms for this book. I will say that it is not own voices, and the author talks about this at the end of the book. She addresses this. She talks about how this book is written from her own lens as a white woman, and she talks about how her whiteness probably affected the story, which I really appreciated. I will also say, do not go into this book thinking it's just going to be doom and gloom. It is one of the most beautiful celebrations of Black boy joy and of hope that I've ever read. I also will say that there is a white woman character in this book that's trying really hard to rescue Abdi, and I was so freaking concerned that it would become like a white savior thing where she was just gonna Daenerys Targaryen come in and liberate him and all his problems would be solved. And that's not what happened. If you start to read this book and you start to get worried that it's gonna get white saviory, it's not. Like, just keep going. Just keep going. Number 7 is somewhat of a polarizing read, and that is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I could say this person's name so many ways, and they would all be wrong. How to pronounce... Okay, so this author is Greek.
Michaelides.
Okay, we're gonna go with Michaelides. It doesn't sound right to me, but... The Silent Patient is an adult suspense thriller told by Alex Michaelides, and it is about Alicia, who is a very talented artist and painter with an incredibly glamorous life. She lives in California at the top of a beautiful hill with her stunning photographer husband. She's got lots of money, her art sells well, she pretty much has it all, and one day she comes home to her loving husband and she shoots him 7 times in the face. Actually, I think she shoots him 9 times. Once the police arrive, all throughout the murder trial, Alicia says absolutely nothing. She utters not one word. And the book starts 7 years later where she's held in a mental institution and she still hasn't spoken. Now, the book is told from the perspective of Theo Faber, who is a criminal psychotherapist, and he becomes just very, very fascinated with Alicia's case, decides to quit his job and move like halfway across the country in order to work with her. He believes that he's the one who's gonna be able to get her to speak. Okay, I was not expecting much from this book because it was very hyped on Bookstagram, and Bookstagram be hyping some whack thrillers. I checked it out in my library. I didn't even care enough to read the synopsis. I was just like, whatever, I'm gonna read the book, I'm not gonna like it, it's fine. From the first page, the first word, shook. When I say that I was drawn in and captivated by the story, I took off work to stay at home and read the book. It was that good. I know Kayla from Books and Lala didn't like this book, and it was definitely a miss for some other reviewers. For me, this book was everything. It's another book that I just have not stopped thinking about. It's getting made into a TV show, I believe, maybe a movie, it's one of the two. Because a lot has been said about this book, I'm gonna talk about some things that I don't hear others discussing. The first thing is how heavy it is in Greek mythos and in Greek culture. Now, the author, Alex, is Greek, and he includes a lot of Greek mythology in the story, which is super cool for a thriller to have so many Greek elements. There's a lot of foreshadowing with the Greek mythological quotes that are cited. So I think if you're a fan of Greek mythology, this story would absolutely be a go for you. I also loved that Theo, actually, like, I'm not gonna lie, I loved Theo. Theo is one of my favorite male characters of all time. He is all about exploring himself. He's such a great example of a guy who's trying actively not to perpetuate abuse, to do better than his parents, to be a healthier man than the men who have come before him. He works very, very hard to unlearn toxic masculine ideals society has pushed him to internalize, and he's working really hard to recover from a history of abuse. I'm really loving that we're slowly getting more stories from men talking about abuse. I thought it was incredibly well done, and it made me love his character so much and feel so connected to his character. I loved that he was not afraid or ashamed to talk about how he felt. He felt like a real frickin' character who wasn't just trying to bite down his feelings and was too afraid to even acknowledge that they existed. Now, in my top YA reads of 2019, I revealed that I had 3 favorite twists in 2019. One of them was Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. Another was The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. At the top of the list, number 3, was the twist at the end of The Silent Patient. I was hyperventilating when I read the twist. I was so freaking shook. I loved the twist. It was so good. Now for book number 6, we're gonna switch gears. See, I told y'all, all of the books on this list are so distinct. Like, do you see why I couldn't pick just 10? Number 6 on this list is Queenie by Candice Carty Williams. This is the story of a 25-year-old British Jamaican woman named Queenie whose life falls apart after her boyfriend breaks up with her. She begins experiencing severe mental health issues for the first time in her life. She's trying to navigate hating her job and not being able to raise her frustrations with her all-white coworkers. On top of the microaggressions that she faces in society as a curvy black woman, she's trying to get over the breakup and trying to convince her family, her traditional Jamaican family, that her mental health issues are real. It was complex and funny, and I loved seeing how the themes were handled. I counted 13 themes in this book, and they were intersected and handled with precise and perfect execution. It's also about the hypersexualization, the fetishization, and the objectification of curvy black women. In this book, you see how men treat Queenie as a sex object. They don't view her as good enough to take home to their mama, which hit home for me because of my experiences with interracial dating, where my non-black partners felt I was good enough to sleep with, but not good enough to be out in public with or to be introduced to family. But on top of all of these heavy topics being explored in Queenie, the story never once loses its comedic relief, and I was dying at so many points throughout the book. But seriously, I just cannot handle how well Candice executed these themes without feeling like they were trying too hard to push a point or overwhelming the story. I read this book in February for Blackathon, and at the time, this was the first time I felt I had been given a real black female character that represents all of black female livelihood. At the time, I had never read a more accurate depiction of blackness and womanhood and of what it's just like to be 25 in general, trying to figure your damn life out. It also is just one of the best anxiety representations I've ever read. Same for PTSD, and I loved the representation for how black girls are viewed as hostile, how they are gaslighted and villainized in society. But do not get the idea that this this book is all about racial struggle and mental health issues, because it's absolutely not. Like I said, there's a lot of joy in this book. I also have to say that Queenie is the reason that you have a Black Girl Magic series. I'm not kidding. This is the reason that I started Black Girl Magic, because I finished this book and I was so wowed, I was so impressed, and then I went on Bookstagram and I was looking at all of the reviews, and I saw so many reviews from white female bookstagrammers who had completely failed to see or recognize any of the complex themes that were present in this novel. And I realized that was because they were reading it from their lens as a white woman, which is totally fine. Like, we all read books through our own lens. But the book was getting such bad ratings, and I realized that without Black people actively reviewing this book and able to talk about the complex themes from our perspective and to point out how incredible this book actually is, then the book isn't going to get the love that it deserved. I noticed that people weren't giving this book the same level of analysis and detail as Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, for example. Those two books are incredibly similar in their themes and messages, but yet Queenie gets villainized and read as a very surface level story, which I find to be absolutely ridiculous because it's one of the most complex books I've ever read. So this book is the reason that I started Black Girl Magic, because I was just so damn frustrated with books about Black girls getting slept on, misread, and misunderstood. One of the things that people misunderstand about Queenie is about her sexual behavior. Queenie gets sex shamed a lot, and a lot of people don't realize that she has severe PTSD, and one of the things that PTSD can make you do is engage in incredibly self-harming behaviors. I feel like people didn't realize that. I think that people underplayed how severely mentally ill Queenie is, and I think that that just speaks to how we don't see Black girls as mentally ill. Despite the fact that she's actively like having panic attacks and super depressed throughout the book, people fail to recognize her as having a mental illness, which I find strange. I've even noticed Black reviewers fail to recognize how mentally ill she is. And it just shows the stigma that we still have within the Black community about recognizing mental illness in each other. There was a woeful lack of understanding surrounding how having an active mental health episode makes one act out. I was shocked by the lack of empathy that her character received, especially from white reviewers, but also from some Black reviewers too. One of my favorite books of all time, All of the Stars. Whew, down to our top 5. Coming in at number 5 is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is an excellent nonfiction novel by criminal justice lawyer Bryan Stevenson, and in it he's talking about his experiences trying to get people off of death row and trying to free the wrongly condemned from the jaws of incarceration. As you can see, I have tabbed this book probably more than any other book in my entire life. If I could get the world to read one book, this is the book that I would pick. Out of all of the books that I've ever read in my entire life, Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson is the one I would beg each and every person that lives on this earth to read. If you support the death penalty, if you believe in lengthy prison sentences, if all you know about the criminal justice system is what you were taught in your 8th grade classroom, you need to read this book. You need to read this book more than anybody. I have never read a more profound and empathic and touching story as Just Mercy. Bryan talks about the cases of several, dozens in fact, of inmates who were wrongly incarcerated or excessively sentenced. He also talks about his experiences just as a young man and his own coming of age. I was really anxious about how to talk about this book because there's nothing that I can say that will successfully get you to understand how much it meant to me and how important it is that you read it. Now, I think it goes without saying that this book does have some very heavy material, so make sure that you're practicing self-care. It took me incredibly long to read it because I kept having to set it down. This book made me unspeakably angry, and it brought up a lot of trauma that I've experienced. This also is a close personal topic to me because I have Black family members who were unjustly incarcerated and had their lives ruined as a result of racism and how pervasive it is in our criminal justice system. All I can really say about this book is that it's in my top 5 for a reason, and if I had to create a list of only 10 of my favorite books of all time, this would be on it. Now, to switch gears yet again, we have an adult fantasy novel. Number 4 on this list is none other than Ovilus Gate by N.K. Jemisin. Nobody is more surprised than me because if you watched my daily vlogs for Blackathon that I did last year in February, you'll know that I had some issues with the 5th season. I didn't get it, I wasn't connecting to it, I didn't understand why everybody was so freaking obsessed with it. And then I read Ovilus Gate, I believe, in October. And everything clicked, and everything made sense. And I realized that N.K. Jemisin
Is a fucking genius.
the moral ambiguity, true moral ambiguity, okay? The writing, the storytelling. Oh my god. And I just realized that the plot twists in this book shook me just as heavily as the plot twist in The Silent Patient. It also has, like, this book is so I can't talk about it. It's a multi-genre novel because it has such heavy elements of thrill and of horror. Every part of a story that a person can love, I love, if that makes sense. This is part of a trilogy, and it tells the story of Essen, who lives in a world that has been fractured. Every so often, a season occurs, and during a season, there are incredible earthquakes. The earth basically becomes unsurvivable. So people band together in what are called comms and try and kind of hoard their resources in order to survive. But to make matters more difficult, there exist people known as origins, people that are able to move and manipulate the earth. And of course, people who are not origins are terrified of them and try and weaponize and kill and murder and eradicate origins whenever possible. And of course, our main character, Essen, is an origin. And so this book is really, really intensely about family and bonds and survival, but it also has heavy representation for racial discrimination. I love how N.K. Jemisin makes use of observed character traits as insight into those characters' behaviors. It's very Sherlockian. She has this incredible ability to create a character and make the reader feel one way about them, then take that same character and evolve them and reveal things about them that makes a reader see that character in an entirely new light. There's also heavy queerness, polyamory, trans rep, and just a constant celebration of Black features and Black hair that I personally really, really love seeing in an adult fantasy. This is absolutely my favorite fantasy series of all time, and I'm so excited and also nervous for the conclusion because there's so many moving parts in this book. The book is so complex that I just can't foresee one book being able to wrap up the entire trilogy. So I'm really, really nervous, but my bestie Starla of Starla Reads absolutely loved the conclusion, and that's all I need to know to be assured that I too will love it. Now we are down to our top 3 reads of 2019. I just love that I've recapped my entire year and have gotten to relive my experiences with these books and share them with you. I've been so excited to make this video and also so nervous because I didn't know if I would be able to do these books justice. Now I do want to say that each of these 3 books could easily be placed in my number 1. They're not necessarily ranked, and I know that that's a huge cop-out, but hear me out. Each of these 3 books represents a very distinct part of who I am, to the point where I could never choose between them because it would mean choosing between 3 separate parts of myself, parts that I wouldn't be me without. These 3 parts of myself that I'm referring to are my personality, my identity, and my sexuality. If you follow me, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that those are parts of me that are incredibly important to me that I could never choose between. The books also feature 3 different and some of my favorite writing styles: stark lyrical, the oral tradition, and harrowing second person. And so without further ado, I have to share that my 3rd favorite book of 2019 was After the Flood by Cassandra Montag, another book that y'all are just asleep on. After the Flood is an adult dystopian that has striking parallels to the 5th season, and it's about Myra, who's trying to survive after waters have flooded the earth. Her husband has kidnapped their eldest daughter and decided to go on their own way without her. He does this while Myra is pregnant with their 2nd daughter, and the book starts about 6 years later. She's had her 2nd daughter, but she still can't stop thinking about her first. And so she decides to take her daughter Pearl and embark on a journey to go find Ro, the elder sister. On this journey, they encounter a crew that lives on a ship. They've banded together to survive, and Myra kind of manipulates the crew into letting her and Pearl join. She's very subtly trying to steer the course toward the island that she believes her eldest daughter is being kept at. So it's about found family, but she's deceiving her found family, and if her deception is discovered, she and her daughter will be killed or thrown off of the ship. If you love just beautiful, lavish, lyrical writing, this book is for you. If you love found family and dystopians, this book is for you. It says a lot that I related so much to Myra's character because her character is so heavily about being a mother, and I do not have children. Myra and Pearl are some of my favorite characters of all time. If you love a ruthless woman, if you love a woman who is capable and intelligent and cunning and willing to stop at nothing to protect herself and the people that she loves, then you will absolutely love this book. I read this book incredibly slowly. It took me many months to read it. I think it took me like 6 months simply because I didn't want to finish my meal. I wanted to sit with it. I wanted to digest it. I didn't want to be done with the story. I wasn't ready for it to be over. And now that it's over, I hate that it's over. It does explore heavy topics such as the repercussions of trauma. There's alcoholism, there are murder, there's some gore in it. so do be aware of trigger warnings when you read this book. But when I tell you that there's no book like this, there's nothing like this book, I genuinely mean it. And the character development is just off the charts with this book. The characters that start the book are not the characters that end the book. The character reveals are incredible. The insight, the way that this book has with words about summarizing the human condition, those one-liners that hit you like a knife in the heart. You gotta read it. Now I want you to guess what you think my top 2 books are. This one shouldn't come as a surprise if you've been following my channel. This is the book that best symbolizes my personal identity, meaning my gender identity as a non-binary person. It is told in one of my favorite writing style, which is the oral tradition with heavy lyrical elements. I've talked about the oral tradition a lot on this channel, and it hits me so personally as a Black reader, and that book is Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. Freshwater is a book about a young individual named Ada who is born with gods inside of them. Ada is born in Nigeria, and they move to America where they experience trauma, and the gods inside of them sort of wake up and splinter into separate selves. And the book is about Ada having to live with these separate selves as they make decisions for Ada, as they take over Ada at times. It's a story about warring with your personality, about gender, about transitioning, about control and power and rage. It's about immigration and identity and all of these incredible things. I've talked about this book a lot off and on about what it means to me and how special it is, and I think anybody trying to understand gender nonconformity, especially as it intersects with being a Black person, should definitely read this book. I think if you're gender nonconforming, you should definitely read this book. I highly recommend the audiobook because it is read by the author, and they did an amazing fucking job of reading this book, and reading it through their voice, through their lens, was such a delicious experience. I kept rewinding it because I wanted to hear them say things again, and I loved every page in this book, and I connected to every single page in this book. Thinking about how much this book means to me makes me want to cry each and every time. It's not something I can communicate how much this book means to me, and I don't think it's something that you can truly understand if this isn't your experience. This is also heavy in spiritual realism, so do be aware of that going in. It is somewhat of an abstract novel, so if you need something that is very grounded, this probably isn't going to make a whole lot of sense to you. But again, Akwaeke Emezi is now one of my auto-buy authors. I want nothing but good things for them in this world and the next, and I can't wait to read their new book, which comes out this year. I need it. This last book represents my sexuality, and it is told in second person, which is a writing style that I really love. And there's 2 things I want to talk about concerning this book before I tell you what it is. The first thing is that I was raving about Freshwater and After the Flood when I read them. And at the time that I read them both, I was like, there's no fucking way anything will beat this book. There's no way. There is simply no way that another book will maybe ever be better to me than this one. The book I'm about to show you, I read at the end of December of 2019. And when I tell you that this broke me, when I tell you that it shattered me, I have read nothing like this before. The second thing that I want to share about this book is that it's nonfiction. And that should show you how incredible it is that out of all of the books on this list that are fiction, out of all of the ways that those books touched me and hit me, how I enjoyed them, a nonfiction book takes the cake.
That should tell you how good the book is.
And that book is none other than In the Dreamhouse by Carmen Maria Machado. I knew this book was good because bookstagrammers that I respect very heavily were raving about it. I still wasn't ready. This is actually a memoir by author Carmen Maria Machado, who wrote Her Body and Other Parties. And this is a memoir about how in her early 20s she moved in with this gorgeous girl into this home that they called the Dreamhouse. And it's about her just loving and living this American dream with this girl that she's head over heels for. The Dreamhouse is full of light and love and passion. And slowly throughout the story, the house begins to darken, the lights turn off, doors begin to open, you're led into the basement, and the house almost overnight transitions into a house of horrors because the relationship, once the curtains are drawn, is actually abusive. And I loved that Carmen used the dream house as a metaphor for abuse. She uses the home as a vessel for exploring and excavating our own traumas, which is so touching because so much of our trauma happens at home, right? And on top of that, it's told in second person. So it happens to the reader. It says, you know, you cower while she throws pots at you. you do this while she does this to you. She does this to you and you react this way. And so not only are you reading Carmen's trauma, but you are also experiencing it as if you are present. She also uses footnotes frequently throughout the book as a way of providing social commentary, which I truly enjoyed. She makes the story about her because it is her story, but she also broadens it to talk about the issue of abuse in queer relationships. Something that we don't often talk about, even those of us who are queer. Especially heterosexual society loves to pretend that abuse can't happen between two women, that two men can't abuse each other, that a woman and a gender nonconforming person, for example, can't have a relationship that's abusive because we assume that queer relationships are all surface level. They can't possibly have enough depth and level to them in order to become abusive. They don't have enough substance in order to evolve into abuse. And I loved seeing that myth dispelled. I loved how Carmen took us through her story and made us a part of it. This book hurt me. It hurt me so much in a way that I needed. I needed this book, just like how I needed Freshwater. Just like how I needed After the Flood. Those 3 books were all books that I felt like if I hadn't read them at the right time, I would have broken. Again, this is one of those books that if you need it, you need it. And you won't know you need it until you read it. It's one of those books that was written for the people it was written for. Freshwater and In the Dreamhouse are 2 books that if they don't hit you, it just means they weren't written for you. They weren't written with you in mind. And that's okay. There's nothing that I can say that will effectively communicate the level of terror I felt while reading this book, the memories that it brought up, the healing that it also brought me, and the gorgeousness of the writing, the quotes that I wrote down, and how profound they all were. This book is like nothing that I've ever read, and it's truly innovative. And those are my top 15 books of 2019. Let me know down below if you also loved any of these books or if you are now planning to read them. Thank you for watching another Bowties and Books production. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I would absolutely love it if you became a part of my Dapper family. All of my social media links are in the description box below, and I can't wait to see you in my next one.